On this episode of Projector, it's all about men doing their duty. Kevin James goes up against more criminals in Paul Blart Mall Cop 2, and Ethan Hawke is a drone pilot who begins to have questions about his job in Good Kill. Hello and welcome to Projector, and first up, because I'm ever so lucky, I'm among the earliest to see Kevin James return to his signature role as Paul Blart, Mall Cop. 6 years after he saved his mall from crooks, security guard Paul Blart, played by Kevin James, has not had a lot of luck. But things could change when he's invited out to a security convention in Las Vegas along with his daughter Maya, played by Ronnie Rodriguez, for a much needed vacation. But trouble soon finds him, as a group of thieves led by Neil McDonough's Vincent plan a lucrative art heist at the hotel Blart is staying at, and once again he's the only man who can stop them. Although this is one of the most unnecessary sequels ever made, it's easy to forget the original was one of 2009's biggest surprise hits, making $140 million at the US box office despite competition from Observe and Report and the fact that it was terrible. Now we have this belated follow-up, although the real question is, who exactly cares anymore? Sequels are often known for cancelling out the character development of the first film or writing out actors who are not returning for the new instalment, but the opening moments of Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 takes this to brutal new levels. Since Glee's Jamie Mays is not back, we learn that Blart has had a divorce 6 days into his marriage at the end of the first, something which I myself jokingly suggested in my own review of that film several years ago, before very briefly bringing back two-time Oscar nominee Shirley Knight as his mother simply to kill her off, all of which happens in the first 2 minutes. That's a particularly dark opening to what is ostensibly a family film and reduces Blart back down to an emotional wreck. The character of Paul Blart is a bizarre one because on the one hand we're meant to consider him an underdog and a hero, but at the same time we're meant to laugh at him for his pompous attitude and taking his minor job all too seriously. The film basically wants to have it both ways, and the result inspires more pity than laughter. But that's typical of many Happy Madison productions. Adam Sandler is once again credited as a producer, where underneath the guise of mild-mannered slapstick and pratfalls, there's a real ugliness and cruelty to the jokes at Blart's expense that comes across as simply mean-spirited. Even though Blart carries maybe a little bit more self-confidence because he still has some pride from the thwarted plot several years ago, he's still largely a pathetic figure of mockery from his weight to his job rather than being in on the joke. Not even Kevin James, who I do think is a very likeable presence despite the films he's appeared in, can really do much to change that fact, as the part is so deadpan and straight-laced much of the time that his cuddly charm is lost. When he's having fun, so are we, but despite gamely throwing himself into the stunts and comedy, he looks exhausted at having to carry this sagging movie. You can't even blame Kevin James for choosing bad material because he co-wrote the script, and is therefore equally accountable for doing the exact same movie again, right down to the structure and jokes. Just like its predecessor, the first half of Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 is an agonising bore that barely offers up a single laugh. Not that the rest of the film does either. Much of this is devoted to Blart overprotecting his daughter Maya, who is keeping secret the fact that she's been confirmed to place at UCLA, but is contemplating throwing that away because she worries that her father may not be able to handle being alone by himself, even though these scenes lack anything resembling a joke. That divide between father and daughter is amplified by the fact that she's hanging around with hotel valet Lane, played by David Henry, who Blart is instantly against, and not just because he doesn't realise that you don't have to pay for parking. Both of these subplots are utterly cliched, and you've probably seen them in dozens of other movies, and are mostly there to pad out the running time. Like the earlier film, a lot of the humour is mined out of Blart's awkwardness, but these are so glacially paced that you can see the punchlines coming from the moment the scene begins, and the movie will spell it out for you when it gets there, making watching the flick take a punishing drag. When it's not doing that, it's laboriously setting up callbacks for later, painfully slowly. Hell, I've attended actual conventions that were far more interesting than anything that happens in this film. Worse is the film's tone-deaf sexism, like an uncomfortable romance where hotel staff member Davina, played by Daniela Alonso, increasingly and inexplicably falls for Blart's mystique as she sends out unintentional signals to him, or a scene where Blart assists a fellow officer who is drunkenly hitting on a woman at a bar and manages to convince her that she's the one who's overreacting. The closest the film gets to a laugh is when it occasionally stumbles into a strange non sequitur, most notably a sequence where Blart ends up fighting an exotic bird in the hotel garden while a demented pianist smiles on, which offers the mirage of an inspired moment in comparison to the desert of mirthless material that surrounds it. It's 45 minutes in before the plot truly kicks in and it becomes a Die Hard clone once more, and by that point you'll have probably lost interest because the kid-friendly action scenes are just as inept as the attempts at laughter, and especially when they attempt to do both. At least the first time around it felt like there were some vague stakes. The mall was locked down, there were police and SWAT on the outside, and extreme sports thieves, the whole action movie setup. Here, just like everything else, the sequel is content to do the same thing half-heartedly. When Blart ends up uncovering the plot, the hotel is not really on any degree of alert whatsoever, as extras smile and wander around obliviously, something which the film doesn't even bother to try and exploit as a joke. This is regardless of the fact that the bad guys fire guns at Blart on several occasions and generally end up trashing several areas of the hotel that just happen to be totally vacant at the time. Not even the hotel security seems to bat an eyelid despite previously being set up as highly efficient, and that there's a rivalry going on between Paul and the head of security, Eduardo, played by Eduardo Verastegui, who promptly disappears for much of the second half anyway. It's established at one point the hotel security has been compromised, but this is purely to explain why Blart doesn't turn to them for help and then promptly forgotten about. The Ocean's 11 inspired bad guys themselves are completely uninteresting, not least renter villain Neil McDonough, who just happens to have heterochromia because that's a good substitute for an actual character, right? Andy Fickman steps into the director's chair for this effort with experience in Disney movies like The Game Plan and Race to Witch Mountain on his CV, but everything about the movie is utterly flat, with the clumsy action sequences barely making any comedic use of the setting, even in moments like where Blart interrupts a stage show. Instead, Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 is simply happy to recycle the first film's highlights like the headbutt, Maya once again being kidnapped, or Blart's sudden hypoglycemia. As the payoffs to long gestating gags fall flat, not even the addition of Blart's fellow Mall Cops as sidekicks adds much to the proceedings, as it just delves further into lowest common denominator humour like a sassy black woman and a Little People band dressed as Kiss in whatever feeble attempts it can make to try and raise anything above the faintest smirk, and the writing is so lazy that there are several scenes where characters just happen to overhear crucial plot points. If Paul Blart Mall Cop was Die Hard, then this is Die Hard 2. The same stuff on a different day and an inferior copy. That's right, this is even worse than the first one. Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 is exactly like the first film, only lamer. A turgid and laboured sequel to the improbable hit, there's seldom a trace of fun or humour in this completely unneeded second entry, spreading itself extremely thin across its 90-minute running time. Even though it tries to be a light-hearted comedy, there's something quite spiteful about the title character and the way he's treated that even Kevin James can't cure, yelling his way through dismal set pieces and feeble gags that will unite families in their boredom over repetitive fat man fall down jokes. Stay with me after the break as I review the new movie that reteams the director and star of Gattaca. Welcome back, as Ethan Hawke debates to himself whether during war there is ever such a thing as a good kill. Tom Egan, played by Ethan Hawke, is a family man and distinguished fighter pilot, but now he serves his days firmly on the ground, piloting drones and their attacks in the Middle East from a control room in a Nevada military base. Egan wants nothing more than to be back in the skies, but the job takes a heavy emotional toll on him, especially when he starts getting new orders from the CIA that may be distinctly unethical. Andrew Niccol has always been attracted to high-concept movies, from writing The Truman Show to helming Gattaca and Lord of War, both of which starred Ethan Hawke, and after some high-profile misfires in the form of In Time and The Host, he's re-teamed with Hawke for a low-budget movie that tries to bring him back to his roots, with limited success. If nothing else, Good Kill has an absolutely fantastic setup and exactly the kind of idea Niccol excels at. Although the film is ostensibly set in 2010, it is the here and now in terms of being ripped from contemporary headlines, and as the film points out, there's less and less actual pilots flying into war zones and more unmanned drones who are doing the work. In its tightly shot opening scene, we view Egan controlling his craft and making it splash, only to pull back to reveal that he's not in the pilot's seat, he's watching a bank of computer monitors showing what's happening 7,000 miles away. As Bruce Greenwood's John's Lament, it used to be that we actually went to where we were at war with. Now pilots are making decisions half a world away and trying to evaluate the consequences, with war itself having become so sophisticated at this point that you can pull the trigger without the enemy even knowing they're being watched, let alone setting foot there. Niccol repeatedly makes reference to how this effectively turns war into some kind of video game, despite John's repeatedly reminding endless sets of new cadets they are not simply firing at a bunch of pixels, they are killing actual living people. Regardless, this younger generation the film posits have been conditioned to consider war in this way, without consideration or empathy for the human side of the conflict, and perhaps they too are becoming drones. If that sounds like it might be more than a little heavy-handed, then that's what much of the film is. It's not the arguments that it makes don't have a point or are not relevant, but it paints the issue in the broadest and loudest strokes imaginable, in case the audience isn't clear that operating this way is morally and ethically wrong. Greenwood has to suffer the worst of this as a wildly implausible commanding officer who claims war is war, but certainly seems to have a number of openly spoken opinions about how dubious their orders are, though I highly doubt someone in his position would go around telling people. Well, not if they wanted to keep their job. It's a credit to Greenwood that he managed to make the character feel at least in some way plausible. In fact, he delivers a superb performance despite being a swearing mouthpiece or writer-director Niccol's opinions in a way that's normally associated with something that's written by Aaron Sorkin. The real problem with the movie is that it's inhabited by political statements masquerading as characters, and only Ethan Hawke manages to transcend that, and that's likely because he doesn't have to speak as much of it. Make no mistake about it, Good Kill is Ethan Hawke's movie. The actor is in virtually every single scene, and it is through his character's eyes that we view the film. But this is by no means a showy performance, as Hawke's pilot is an extremely introverted individual who, as his wife says, gets even quieter when he's troubled. In essence, that makes him the perfect man for the job. He's got years of experience and does the orders without quibble and expert precision. But in his mind, his passion was never about killing people, it was about the exhilaration of flight, and doing his duty is making him die on the inside. He only perseveres because someday he might get his wings back. But underneath the stoic front, the cracks are beginning to show. He has a drinking problem that is spiralling out of control, he's barely there when he's at home, and even he knows it. Despite having such a withdrawn role, it's a testament to how solid an actor Hawke is that we understand his motivations throughout the whole film. Sadly, he's surrounded by supporting players who are thinly characterised, with Zoe Kravitz making the best of a headstrong young navigator who has been newly reassigned, while his fellow crew members, played by Jake Abel and Dylan Kennan, are strawman jerks who have no qualms whatsoever about what they're doing, justifying their efforts by arguing no one has attacked New York lately. Hardly exactly subtle. Much of Hawke's anguish takes place at home, where he evades questions about his day from his wife Molly, played by January Jones, who is clearly sexually frustrated, and it's little wonder why her husband suspects she might be having an affair as he falls deeper into depression. Although Jones is often cited as being the worst cast member on Mad Men, there's little any actress could really do with an underwritten part that alternates between being a devoted and patient lover and an irritated spouse. And although there are several great scenes where Tom finally opens up to her later on, she's mostly called upon to stand aside looking pretty. Military wives really deserve better portrayals than this overly familiar melodrama. The thing is, the movie's message only gets more obvious as time goes by, but aside from that, there's not much else it really wants to say otherwise, feeling like a half-formed idea stretched to feature length. A lot of the film's running time is made up of Egan carrying out his missions in his cubicle, and that does make for a fairly repetitive structure once the initial interest begins to wear off. That said, there is an undeniable power in seeing his target suddenly disappear in the quick flash of a missile explosion, and that doesn't dissipate over time, instead only getting more uncomfortable as we see it time and time again, aware of the 10-second gap between the launch and the impact that could mean that innocents and civilians could easily come into harm's way with nothing to do but just watch the horror unfold. So you could reason that the way the film is plotted gives you a sense of Egan's mindset, with that numbing and still painful sight of the dead lingering in his mind and ours. Nikhil is both fascinated by the sense of omniscience of the overhead view that the drone's cameras provide, and yet also keenly knows their limits. Somewhat akin to the Truman Show, you can effectively spy on people going about their lives without them ever knowing about it, but unlike Truman, you can only do so much from a distance where you can't intervene, and nor can you really get to know who those people are. That's the issue when the agency, voiced by Peter Coyote, gives commands over speakerphone on targets that don't appear to be dangerous. At what point does it stop being protection or simply perpetuating the cycle of violence? Nikhil makes this point quite provocatively when, during a routine observation, the control room witnesses a housekeeper being raped and cannot do anything about it. Unfortunately, Nikhil extends this into a subplot that runs through the film, and I found the use of sexual violence in this case to be quite distasteful, as the movie keeps coming back to this housekeeper, who it is revealed is subjected to this on a regular basis. This is made worse by the way it ties into the film's absolutely absurd resolution, which tries to offer its protagonist some kind of victory in the most crassly exploitative way, and it is unbelievably dumb. You could argue that there's still some ambiguity in those final moments, but I feel it presents the main character indulging in exactly the same kind of behaviour the rest of the movie has been condemning, except now it's shown as some sort of righteous, crowd-pleasing moment that is the most ill-advised ending that you could possibly imagine. Good Kill raises some interesting arguments, but it doesn't bring anything else to the table on a contentious subject matter. Ethan Hawke's moody and quiet performance of a man having difficulty adjusting to a world where you can kill people half a world away and come home for a barbecue is at the forefront of this war drama, but Nichols' writing and direction ends up becoming a bunch of emotionally manipulative images and sound bites than a story, and throws away credibility for an ending that will likely rank as one of the year's very worst. On the next episode, I'll be looking at the directorial debuts of Russell Crowe and Alan Rickman, but until then, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out. I'm gonna fly.